Thank you for joining Wars of the Rosies as we continue with part 16, The Vein of Evidence in the Third Degree, from The Lost Word, Its Hidden Meaning, by George H. Steinmetz. Chapter 15, The Vein of Evidence in the Third Degree. It is in the third degree that one encounters the veiled references from which the secret doctrine may be adduced, and that is exactly where it should be discovered, for the master's degree is the spiritual degree of Freemasonry. The third degree deals with the spiritual. No qualified Masonic authority will dispute. The very preparation adopts the ancient custom of removing the shoes from the feet. For the ground upon which thou standeth is holy. The fellow craft, having acquired self-consciousness and a reasoning mind, has used them to acquire knowledge, and that knowledge acquaints him with the verity of the spiritual. He begins his journey to attain thereto, though he believes in the immortality of the human soul as a Mason. His quest is a sad farce if it must end in death before attainment. We prefer to believe with Brother Waite that it is no glorious dream but that which, under God, is possible here and now. Even the color of the lodge, blue, which has given rise to the expression Blue Lodge, conveys a veiled hint. The explanation found in the ritual states that our ancient brethren held their meetings on high hills and in low vales. Thus, the blue sky was covering of their lodgings. This is further corroborated by the ritualistic explanation of the covering of a lodge, which is said to be no less than the clouded canopy or star-decked heavens. This is but the esoteric explanation. What is its deeper significance? The Hebrew word teklet, or teklat, means blue, and comes from the root meaning perfection. Thus it is seen that Blue Lodge is Perfection Lodge, and the very name is indicative of that state of being for which one strives. Not immortality, hereafter, which all Masons profess to believe they will then attain, but a realization of that immortality, here and now, cosmic consciousness. It has proven beyond reasonable doubt that the compasses are a symbol of the equilateral triangle, which in turn is a symbol of deity. Inverted, the symbol of spiritual man and likewise of the spiritual state in general. The reception of the candidate is therefore significant and has meaning far beyond the exoteric explanation proffered him at the time. Likewise, it has an equally deeper import than that contained in the explanation given at the time. One is cautioned never to lose sight of that invaluable instrument. Truly can it be called an invaluable instrument when its significance as a symbol of the spiritual is realized. The compasses remind us to circumscribe our desires and keep our passions in due bounds. And the obvious inference is that this is a means of gaining the end sought. There is a statement in the Bhagavad Gita which reveals how important is the control of the passions to the individual who aspires to attain the Master's word, and all which such attainment connotes. There is a path to spirit which those well learned in the Vedas call the imperishable, that path upon which the strong men who have mastered their minds, or the true fellow crafts, and controlled their passions, or the master masons, seek to tread. The step is a combination of the two preceding steps, and we recall that the advent of the spiritual into matter is the cause of the birth of the cyclical. Admittedly, this symbolism is a bit awkward, but this is excusable when one realizes the extreme difficulty of finding material analogies for abstractions. The compasses now dominate the square, eclipsing it, and, as it were, discarding it in the background as no longer needed. The position of the square and compass on the altar and the manner of wearing the master's apron are discussed in detail in Freemasonry, Its Hidden Meaning. See page 146 of that work. This, coupled with the manner of wearing the apron, each being strictly symbolical of the same thing, the conquest of the material by the spiritual, emphasize the transition from the material to the spiritual realm. The working tools of the third degree are all the implements of Masonry, but especially the trowel. The spiritual man, quite naturally, is cognizant of both the material and the cyclical. For, as Dr. Bucky points out, the acquisition of cosmic consciousness does not detract from the physical senses nor diminish the intellectual ability, but on the other hand, enhances both. Just as the Master Mason continues to use the working tools of the two previous degrees, and we may assume he should be more adept in those uses than the apprentice or fellow craft, but he also has a tool peculiar to his own attainments, which the others are not yet capable of using. That tool with its equilateral triangle is a spiritual emblem. The third degree is referred to as the sublime degree of Master Mason. Sublime, elevated or exalted, awakening an uplifting emotion, producing a sense of elevated beauty, grandeur, etc., elevated by joy, elated. To make or cause to be sublime, variously to exalt, refine, purify. From a strictly academic viewpoint, what is sublime about the third degree? Sublime is indeed an exaggerated misnomer if we see in it only the exoteric explanation of the ritual and the lectures. Either these who in the past so named it were carried away by their enthusiasm or saw something in it besides the ritualistic explanation. Be assured we are not here attempting to disparage the degree, but rather to emphasize the fact that it is sublime. But its sublimity is of the essence, the secret doctrine, and not its obvious moral and ethical lesson. We quoted above the definition of sublime at length and with purpose. Turn back to the chapter on cosmic consciousness and note the reoccurrence of the words found in the definition of sublime: elevated, exalted, uplifting emotion, elevated by joy, elated. To refine, purify. Perhaps we begin to glimpse why the third degree is called sublime. If it was what we suspect it to be, it can only be described by the same feeble words with which we attempt to describe cosmic consciousness. For be reminded that things equal to the same thing are equal to each other. The entered apprentice enters between both columns, Boaz and Jacob. He is not told their significance, as it is neither the time nor place for such explanation. Nevertheless, the silent implication is present, and they bear for him the same significance as the fellow craft who is given an explanation. As in most instances in Masonry, the fellow craft is offered but a rational explanation, and he is left to his own devices to discover the hidden meaning. In Freemasonry, Its Hidden Meaning, we have included a lengthy quotation from Judge Thomas Tward relative to the esoteric significance of the two columns. Judge Tward points out that 1, or the mathematical element, is law, while Boaz typifies personality or personal choice. Hence, the two columns symbolize the great universal law and personal choice. These columns at the entrance of the temple were not necessary for any material support, but represented a symbolical truth. The Temple of Solomon was the house of God, and the only reason for entering that house was to come into his presence. It is discovered that the only way to enter the temple is to pass between these two columns, the one Jachin, law, the other Boaz, personal choice. This is the truth. The column symbolized to the fellow craft. To enter the presence of God, it is not enough to recognize his existence. One must desire to be in his presence. He must come of his own free will and accord. Even this is not sufficient. When the objective mind realizes the urge to be in God's presence, one is faced with the existence of the other column, Jacob, the constant reminder that it must be in conformity with universal law. Symbology in Freemasonry is consistent. It does not change. True, there are multiple meanings, but some or all meanings are always applicable. If this were not true, these symbols would be meaningless, and the study of them impossible. The columns have the same meaning for the apprentice and the master mason, to whom they are not explained. The former because he is not ready for the explanation, the latter because he is presumed to have discovered their meaning. As for the fellow craft, whose attention is directed to them, and who is given the exoteric explanation, has a clue to the esoteric symbology. But his very act of passing between them, the master should be reminded that he is entering the lodge of his own free will and accord, and that his progress must, as heretofore, be in accordance with universal law. He is seeking spiritual illumination, and it can be attained only under these two conditions. Our previous research has shown the unanimity of opinion of the various authorities that always illumination is the result of complying with a certain set of conditions. Here in Masonry we have a symbolic exposition of that same incontrovertible fact. Many Masons who are cognizant of the implications of the secret doctrine mistakenly look for them only in the working of the various degrees, and entirely overlook the fact that they are present at all times. Even in the prosaic, stated communications, when no degrees are conferred, perhaps one of the outstanding symbolic expositions of the thesis is the progressive symbolism of the jewels of the officers of the lodge, continuing on through the past master's jewel. This symbology is not in consecutive order as one might expect, and for that reason is not readily apparent. Again, it might be questioned if the ritualistic explanation has not been corrupted over the period of time it has been in use. The thought occurs because there is not uniformity in all grand jurisdictions. None can gainsay that we meet on the level, applying a deeper implication than the mere fact of meeting in a lodge room. All are on the material level of existence, symbolized by the level. The question arises if we part upon the square or on the plumb, and conversely if we act upon the plumb or on the square. If we act upon the square, then we are part upon the plumb, and we discover a mystic implication. To act is physical material. All can do so. But if the parting means more than the temporal, than the temporary parting of each leaving the lodge and going his separate way, then it is likewise applicable to the degree of spiritual attainment where all obviously part, for none attain to the same levels at the same time. Logically, the level should be the jewel of the junior warden, for the same reason that the level typifies the material or physical, the lowest plane of existence, and as such it should correspond to the lowest of the three officers. However, this does not harmonize with the fact that the junior warden represents Hiram the architect, the spiritual man. Likewise, the senior warden in all other instances typifies Hiram, king of Tyre, and Hiram of Tyre is obviously the symbol of the material. Taking that symbology directly from the biblical account, as all the other symbology is highly consistent, it appears that some small inaccuracy must be condoned that a greater one not be committed. Thus we reverse the usual order and start with the plumb, add the level, with the two combining to make the square, which we see as the jewel of office of the worshipful master. The jewel of the worshipful master. Figure 1. Figure 2. Plate 6. The master wears a square in the position shown in Plate 6, Figure 1. He represents King Solomon, the complete man, composed of body, soul, and spirit, who has succeeded in raising the plumb of the cyclical self-consciousness above the level of the material, simple consciousness. The hypotenuse at the bottom of the square, making of it a right-angled triangle, is assumed. See Plate 6, Figure 2. He is completing his round of the 7th and last year in the chairs, emblematic of the ego, who having incarnated many times, is completing his last incarnation and who needs return to earth no more. The worshipful master, having completed his term around of labor for the lodge, will not return to the chairs. He has earned his reward and his release from the labors of the lodge. He is now a past master, and his jewel signifies that fact. Past master's jewels. Figure 1 above, Grand Lodge of California. Figure 2 below, Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania. Plate 7. There are extant 2 different types of past master jewels. See Plate 7, Figure 1 and 2. It is nothing less than marvelous that both symbolize the same thing, particularly when it is considered that there is a small likelihood that each was deliberately adopted for that purpose. It is extremely doubtful if those jurisdictions who use the 47th problem as the past master's jewel were cognizant of the implications of the compasses on the quadrant. Else they would not have turned to the more obscure symbolism. Admittedly, the compasses on the quadrant is more obvious. Plate 7, Figure 1. The symbology of the lodge, as we have discovered, represents the evolution of man, from his physical being in the first degree endowed with but simple consciousness, up through the fellowcraft degree when the cyclical self-consciousness is added, and on the degree of the master where the spiritual is encountered. Here is the complete man with all his attributes, recognized by himself and ready to begin his labor. His first round is that of the lowest officer in the line. He emulates the soul of man on its 7 rounds, working up through the 7 chairs of the lodge until he becomes master of the lodge, i.e., attains mastership. Having served his term of office, discharged his duties, and accomplished the end of his previous 6 years of labor, indicative of the fact that the complete man has succeeded in perfecting himself and is now the perfect man, the spiritual man. It must be known in order to understand this symbology that the zodiac is divided into 12 parts. Accordingly to occult teaching, each reincarnation is under the adjoining sign of the zodiac. Hence a sign, 30 degrees, is a symbol of rebirth, and the moving over or the advancement of 30 degrees is emblematic of rebirth. The compasses, as shown in Plate 7, Figure 1, are placed on the quadrant, explicitly informing that the square of the master, which is 90 degrees, has been advanced or progressed, to use the astrological terminology, 30 degrees, sign of rebirth. And this is emphasized by the fact that the quadrant of the original square is still shown. The blazing sun has dual significance. It is emblematic of the brilliant enlightenment which accomplishes the attainment of the spiritual. The sun is likewise the symbol of deity, of divinity, and therefore connotes that the past master has attained cognition of his own innermost divinity. We have said that the 47th problem carries the same symbology, except that it is not as readily apparent. Here again, the three planes of being are symbolized. The horizontal line represents the material. It is joined at a right angle to the plumb of the cyclical, and the hypotenuse is added, emblematic of the addition of the spiritual. For Masonic purposes, the 47th problem is usually set forth as lines of 4 units in length, 3 units in height, with the resultant 5 units of hypotenuse. However, it is immaterial how long the horizontal or perpendicular lines may be. The square of the hypotenuse will always be the sum of the squares of the other two. This signifies, as taught in the ancient mysteries, that man is composed of the physical, the cyclical, and the spiritual, but that, regardless of his physical and cyclical development, the spiritual will equal their sum total and be predominant. As applied to the past master's jewel, we discern his cognizance of the spiritual, his divine inheritance. It is the thesis of occult philosophy that the great truths of the universe and of man's being were revealed to man by deity in the dim past of the race, and that he then truly lived in the golden age. He followed the plans laid down on the trestle board, lived in close consciousness of his creator, and obeyed universal law. In that day man prospered and was happy and content. The working tools of masonry were known and used. There was no bell in the temple, and the true word was possessed on earth. Man had not yet partaken of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Peace and harmony, liberty, equality, and fraternity was the watchword, and the fact, that which is variously labeled sin, error, illusion, entered into man's objective world through his erroneous thinking and his misunderstanding of universal law. As his own self-consciousness expanded a more objective and material world for him, he gradually lost his closeness to deity and consequently his spiritual awareness. Note well, deity did not withdraw from man, man withdrew, lost his closeness with God. The supreme remains consistent. Man is the variable, but that which man can lose, man can again find. That the great truths might not be irrevocably lost to humanity, that they might be preserved, so future generations could discover the right, the supreme architect seems to impart these truths or allow them to be discovered by certain individuals from generation to generation who preserve them. We have seen how, when the light has been nearly extinguished in past times, the Redeemer or Savior has appeared to restate the truth in the language of the time and the peoples to whom he came. Likewise, to this end, it is said that the knowledge was entrusted, veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols, to certain organizations, such as the Egyptian mysteries, the Eleusinian mysteries, the early Christian mysteries, the Rosicrucian movement of the Middle Ages, Bacon's secret society, and finally Freemasonry, which Manly Hall names the bright and glorious son of a mysterious and hidden father. In accordance with this plan, thousands, yes even millions, of individuals have contributed to the preservation of a doctrine, the very existence of which many were in utter ignorance. We see this more clearly when we realize that some of these in the past, who may have suspected the existence of a secret teaching, have made obvious changes in the ritual, which we may surmise were made to conform the ritual more closely to their ideals of what the secret doctrine should be. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Rosies. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.